We are letting people in, and I am sorry we are late in starting this. Unfortunately, I am having severe technical difficulties. And so this from my phone, but all of the delays are my fault. This is everyone on the MoMA team is doing all they can to help me. And if all else fails, I'm going to shut down my phone and use the trusty landline, which is on my mom's couch. So I really am sorry about this. Believe it or not, we've been online since 11:30 trying to get me started. And there's an epic Wi-Fi failure around here. So I'm really sorry about that. We're going to give everyone another minute or two to sign in because oh my gosh. All right. I can see that there are 387 people on. So we're going to get going because you all have waited long enough. So one more word. I apologize. Technologically, I have some real challenges, and this is a great illustration of that. But welcome to our second Seeing Through Photographs Study Center. We are so excited to share these photographs with you, and thank you all for joining. A few technical details that, based on last time, we've realized we're going to repeat once or twice during the session. One is that the chat function is for you all to communicate with one another. So you can use it to send a message to your participants, but it's not the best way to reach the panelists. The panelists being myself, Tasha Lutek, my colleague who you'll see in a moment, and our wonderful colleagues in education and AV who are also helping us manage all this. So the chat is for you all. The Q&A function is the best way to show us questions you have. And so that is, as we're going through showing photographs, the Q&A function is the best way to do that. We are recording this. So again, this is like live TV. It'll be great, but warts and all. So this is live and you are being recorded. We will also save this recording to the course. So if you miss something, it'll be there afterward. As we did this 2 weeks ago, and it was really terrific. We had so much fun, but we decided there were so many at the end, down a little bit, and we're going to try to think about fewer photographers so that we can go more in depth. We will be sending you a little very short questionnaire afterward to see if you like this or what, because really this is for you and we want it to be something that's rewarding and engaging for you. So all that said, let me introduce Tasha Lutek. Tasha.
Hi.
Yay, there you are. Great.
Oh, I think Sarah's audio is cutting out.
Okay, there. Now I can hear you.
Okay.
Thrilled you're here. Thank you again for helping me with this. Maybe you'll tell everyone a little bit about what you do at the museum and how this is sort of a virtual translation of that experience.
Sure. So I'm the collection specialist for the Department of Photography, which means I get to work with all aspects of the collection, including acquisitions, research, outgoing loans, and a major part of my position is the study center, which is a resource we have at the museum. Each department has one, and we allow scholars, visitors, classes, students, all kinds of people can make an appointment to come in and have an intimate viewing experience with photographs. And since we're not able to do that now, this has been developed to try to continue to share photographs with you and loosely along the guidelines of the Coursera course that you're enrolled in. I think Sarah's audio is frozen.
No.
Are you there, Sarah?
Yeah, to go like this phone. That's how you'll.
Okay. So yeah, should we get started with this?
Let's start. I will just say, can I just little welcome to again the
So I'm not sure. I think what's going to happen is that
Okay.
Sarah is going to call on her landline, and
I'm on my, can you hear me now?
yes, so she'll
Okay.
be available, but
So
voice
sorry.
only.
So apologies for that, but I'm going to be on my phone because everything else is too precarious.
We're doing the best
Tasha,
we can.
we are doing the best we can. Tasha, first of all, just can you see in the chat function, Tasha, where everyone's calling in from?
Yes.
Maybe just read out a few of those names because I loved seeing. I saw India, I saw Belgium, I saw all of these.
Romania, Portugal, Jerusalem, Brazil, New York, Canada, Prague, London, Poland, Ecuador, Germany, Bangkok, Puerto Rico, Spain, Buenos Aires. I feel like I saw St. Louis.
All right.
Maryland.
Well, that's so great.
Yeah,
but Tasha, why don't we begin by having you start with what we prepared?
Yeah. So
Okay.
Can we go to the slideshow? Okay, great. So as you can see, the theme for this session is pictures of people. And can we go to the next slide, slide 2? So the way we've devised this is we've selected 4 photographers to focus on, and we'll do an intro for each, and we'll answer your questions throughout. So the first one is Frances Benjamin Johnston. You might be aware Sarah just published an amazing publication of this work. And these are photographs from the Hampton album. It's a commission that Frances Benjamin Johnston was asked to do of this school that was developed. The people who attended the school were African American students and Native American students, and it was a way to, sorry, I'm just getting my screen. It was the album, excuse me, sorry. So Frances Benjamin Johnston was commissioned to photograph this school, and she was a professional photographer. And can we go to the next slide, actually? Great. So the album has these beautiful platinum prints. They are currently on view, which is another reason we wanted to show them to you here. And sorry, Sarah, are you still there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm like listening on my cell phone because I accidentally hung up on my regular phone. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
So I can hear you through my cell phone, and I'm trying to get back on the internet. But I was wondering if Howie could recall me on my landline for the audio, if that helps. I don't know if that helps. But I also think it's okay. I can hear you while you're talking, and I can chime in.
Great. So these photographs are portraits of the students in the school. She would have made them with a large format camera. And you can see the technical precision and the just elegant forms that she's creating in these photographs. And what's interesting in particular about these is just the layers of meaning of each photograph. So here they, stylistically are just very formal, beautiful photographs, but it's also, why this particular school? So this school, the intention was to show how after the abolition of slavery, the US was doing with educating people. So many of the students were the children and grandchildren of former slaves. And there's a lot of controversy over the ethical, just the ethics of this style of educating people, which was kind of assimilating them into a structure.
Maybe, Tasha, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is it okay? I mean, can I talk a little bit about this album?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah. You're the expert on the Hampton album.
Well, I don't know expert, but I will say it was so much fun for me to get, we published this as a book. And I apologize if I'm repeating something you said while I was having even greater technical difficulties. But we published a book that's a facsimile of this album. Have we talked about that yet?
Yes, I just mentioned that. And I also wanted to mention that there's an amazing essay by LaToya Ruby Frazier in that book that discusses the next slide. Actually, if we could go to that. But go ahead, Sarah, continue.
Right. So the school is notable because it was one of the schools founded after, in the wake of the Civil War to try to provide an education for newly freed slaves. And yes, as Tasha pointed out, their children and later grandchildren. By the time Frances Benjamin Johnston photographed it, the school had actually hired her to make these pictures because the school was asked to describe its activities for the 1900 World's Fair in Paris. And so what happened was she went to the school for about 6 weeks in December of 1899 and January of 1900 with her mother as her assistant. And she was interested in capturing what the educational philosophy was of the school with the full support of these administration and the students. The question of agency, of whose view of the school she was representing, is an important one. And it's because there are the model of education that Hampton was promoting was one that was really emphasizing vocational training or agricultural training. And although when she made these photographs just around the turn of the century, there was a lot of progressive support for that model, it very shortly thereafter fell into disfavor for very good reasons, because as W.E.B. Du Bois and others argued, it was a very limited view of what African Americans were capable of being taught. So in other words, the idea that they shouldn't receive a full university college education was something that was soon recognized as a limitation. And now the school is actually a fully accredited university. So it was definitely a complex moment, but let's see, what's the next? And the question I just see on my phone, the question of who
commissioned the album?
Yeah, so the school commissioned the album. So let's see, what's the next
sorry
slide?
if that was unclear. Another good question that's here, Sarah.
Yeah, Tasha, maybe you read me the question.
What's that?
Maybe you read me the questions, Tasha.
Yeah. How did she learn photography? I think that's an interesting story with her in particular.
Yeah. Frances Benjamin Johnston actually she approached photography. I can't have you here. Sorry. My mom, that's driving me crazy.
She approached photography as an artist. She was trained at the Académie Julian in Paris, and she really learned how to make photographs to accompany her work as a journalist. And that idea of so she was really the first female. She's known as the first female photojournalist, and she was hired by lots of people. Lots of leading magazines around the United States in the 1890s. And she also operated a successful portrait studio out in the studio that they had built sort of in the garden of her parents' house in DC. Is that the question you had in mind, Tasha?
Yes, exactly.
What I love about this image that's on your screens right now, I think, is this the one with the page with the tissue visible?
Yes, so the page is visible,
okay.
the full mount, and then a detail view of the image.
So it really illustrates so much about the album, and if we were able to be in our study center, you could see this. So the image is one that's very classically composed. You know, she had a lot, she was a formidable human being, and you can see that she's asking the students to pose in a very particular way. And because this is an interior shot with a large format camera on a tripod, they would have had to stay still for some time. But on the right side, you can also see the album itself has been disbound, but the individual pages with their tissue overlay are intact. And so the top image shows that tissue overlay over the picture, and then the bottom one shows that folded around behind. And it's an amazingly beautiful physical album, and understanding its materiality was something that we really dug into as we were publishing it for the first time, to try to learn who bound it and when. And we've come to realize that it was bound actually after the 1900 World's Fair, largely on account of some paper that we found stuffed into the spine of the original bounding for bulking. And that paper was a newsletter from the November 1900 Hampton School newsletter, which was after the fair had closed. So we knew that if they were using an old newsletter for bulking, it was definitely bound after that. That was a fun discovery.
So there's another question about the photographers and their relationships with their subjects. Mm-hmm. I know in your essay you speculate about Johnston's views on the commission and the school. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. I think she was a highly regarded photographer, and even though and this was her first commission that led to others that she did for Tuskegee, which was founded by Booker T. Washington, who was a Hampton graduate, and the Carlisle Institute. So her relationship with the school, I would describe as a respectful, productive one. She really helped them understand how their, okay, my mom says it's on. Does everybody agree? I'm really, really sorry. We did try. So I would say it was a productive one. It was great for the school to have this record of their activities, and it was great for Frances Benjamin Johnston to have such an opportunity to really figure out how to bring together the art of photography and the business. So she didn't think of those things as incompatible, even though at that time, someone like Alfred Stieglitz thought, this is just terrible. Sorry, that's, nope. Susie, Mom. That's my mom's doctor. I'm really.
Real Study Center, there's interruptions, things come up.
It's true. Every once in a while in the Real Study Center, things like this happen, although we really do a little bit of a better job in person. Okay. So maybe, Tasha, it's 12:26. Let's look at the next slide now that I can see it. Or is there another good question that you want me to try to answer?
The only question I wanted to call out, Mauro Santoro asked, did you print the book from original negatives or scanned prints? which I thought was interesting about the materiality. Someone also says hello to your mom. So
much afterward.
I just
not her fault.
To point out that we actually don't really collect negatives, with the exception of the Atche glass plate negatives. So this book was made from the prints, and there's actually an article on Medium, or MoMA magazine, that Sarah did with Mark Saper in Publications, and it kind of details the printing process of creating a book. Meaning the printing of our publication, not the printing of her prints. So you might want.
I actually have it here. I gave it to my mom for Christmas, so that's why she has a copy here. But we printed actually 2 editions of it. We printed this, which is the trade edition, which is so beautiful and wonderful. We also printed a deluxe edition, and in each we photographed not only the individual images from scans, as Tasha mentioned, but we also photographed and scanned the text from the interleaving sheets so that you can actually see the handwriting that originally accompanied these pictures. They were on interleaving sheets in the original, but we scanned them and printed them with the pictures here. And I think it's just such a great way to give a feel for how this album originally circulated. So great.
And I think I just messed up. I was trying to type an answer to someone, but I just wanted to clarify, this is Hampton, Virginia, not the Hamptons. I'm sorry. I was flustered in the beginning, and I feel like I missed some very important details.
Flustered. I'm taking off my sweater.
Okay. Can we go back to the slideshow, and we're going to resume with August Sonder? Is that right, Sarah?
Oh, great. Yeah. Are there any other questions about, sorry, before we go on, let's go to these.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
We have 3 installation views that will also give you a sense of the scale and materiality, which is, again, something we try to do in the study center. So you can see on the left, there are 4 pictures. Hi, Amy from Hong Kong. On the left, there are 4 photographs that are framed on the wall. That's how big the actual prints are. And remember that these are all contact platinum prints. So the negative is exactly the same size as those prints. And then in that little vitrine, can you go to the next slide, Howie? In that little vitrine, we have a detail here. This is the physical album, the shell of it. And on the right is one of the pages from it, where you can see the platinum print is below it, and that wonderful little interleaving sheet is folded on top of it. So this gives you a nice sense. Again, if we were in the study center, these are the kinds of things we'd be able to show you. And then next slide, please.
Sarah, I just want to note also that that installation view is from the Lincoln Kirstein exhibition, and he is responsible for
Thank you.
this.
Very, very good. There's a wonderful story that we tell in the book of how the album made it into Lincoln Kirstein's hands, and from Lincoln Kirstein to the museum, and that when it first arrived at the museum, everyone assumed it had been made by a male photographer because Frances Benjamin Johnston's name is nowhere on it, and that a wonderful curator, a predecessor of mine, very intrepid woman named Grace Mayer, went down to Hampton, Virginia, and actually discovered in the old newsletters that the author of the album was Frances Benjamin Johnston. But it's a wonderful story and worth paying attention to. However, it wasn't just that we put these on view in Lincoln Kirstein's Modern. This is an image of galleries that are sadly now in the dark at the museum. But if we were all on 53rd Street together, these 4 photographs are 4 images from the Hampton album that are on view in Gallery 502. And another article, I should say, Magazine is this online platform that all of us contribute to. Tasha's written articles for it, I have. And we, with Raj Roy, the chief curator of film, he and I did what's called a gallery hang on Medium. And it's where we talk through sort of the philosophy of how we decided what was going to be on view in that gallery. So that's just a nice little thing you can find on Medium. Also, there are little detailed installation views as well. Okay, carrying on. Oh, good, I'm glad some of you got to see it. And the good news is it will be on view when we reopen. We don't know exactly when that will be, but whenever it will be, we can do it safely, we will. Okay.
So August Sonder, you want to start, Tasha, or you want me to start?
It's up to you. So these are two prints from his project, People of the 20th Century. We have The Young Farmers and The Painter's Wife. This was a project, and Sarah knows a lot about August Sonder because she's involved in a project that's reviewing all of this work, Sonder's entire project.
You want me to give it a little,
yeah,
can I give that a little shout out?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we acquired, although August Sonder actually first came into the museum collection in 1953, when Edward Steichen, who was the head of the Department of the Photography at the time, traveled to Germany and met Sonder, and they worked together to come up with an amazing collection of pictures that were acquired in 53, which actually helped establish Sonder's reputation in the United States. He was really not very well known at all. But in 2015, we acquired a full set of this magnum opus, this lifelong effort of August Sonder's called People of the 20th Century. And these are two of my favorite images from it. Our favorite images, right, Tasha?
Yeah, I picked these and they just so happen to be
right. So it happens to be Tasha's and my favorite book. And so these images from People of the 20th Century, it's interesting, the ambition to present that people of the 20th century, but told exclusively through photographs of the German people, really in the first quarter of the 20th century or first third, speaks to this ambition. And it's something that's been so interesting to us that a colleague from Columbia named Noam Elcott and I have been working on a 5-year research initiative, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. And that the principle is that he took the people of the 20th century, he divided them into 7 categories, and those 7 categories were subdivided into 49 portfolios. And what we've done is we've invited different people from different expertises to each pick a portfolio of their choosing and present it according to their own expertise and interest. So we've had poets and artists and professors of history and professors of science, and all of these people look at Sonder from their individual perspectives and thus help open up the way in which we think about Sonder from all of our perspectives. And it's been a really wonderful learning experience. We're dreaming of ways of making it public. We're actually probably going to postpone the 5th year because of the coronavirus. Shed a tear. But postponing isn't the same as canceling, as we've all come to understand. And so when we finish this, we're thinking of little ways of sharing it along the way. And actually, in Pictures of People, week 4 of Seeing Through Photographs, my presentation in the 2nd year of the August Sonder project is online there as a resource. So if anyone's interested, you can, I presented the portfolio Woman and Man, and it's there. So
is our slideshow no longer visible?
I don't think it's visible based on the fact that
Howie, can you bring it back?
Thanks, Howie.
Great. Okay.
Oh, this is a wonderful thing.
So this is another image from this same project. All the images we're showing are from this project, People of the 20th Century. And as Sarah was mentioning, Sonder's work was in the collection fairly early on. And on the left, you see the vintage print that we acquired in 1953. It was the gift of August Sonder. And on the right is a portfolio print. So recently, we were able to acquire a full edition of the project sorted by each portfolio from Sonder's family. And these are modern prints. They were made in the 1990s, but because it's not possible to collect vintage prints of this work, this is a way for us to acquire the entire project. So
can I speak to that just while this slide is up? Let's leave the slide up. We definitely don't need to see me. But
this really points out a really interesting paradox in terms of why we couldn't acquire vintage prints. So we were really fortunate about that 1953 acquisition that Steichen and Sonder were able to work together to build a collection of a representation of his work at MoMA. The picture on the right shows the full negative because in the 1990s, the decision was made to intervene less, to go with what was known as the most frequent cropping, and often to be a little more generous in the cropping if there was more information in the negative. And so the difference between the images on the left and the right, one is cropping, two is tonality. You can see even in this virtual sense, where of course everything is somewhat random, but even in this virtual sense, you can see there's a richer, softer tonal range in the 1953 print, even though I should say in defense of the 2015 prints, they are exceptional. And we make what we call a list of strategic acquisition priorities every 5 to 10 years. And when we make those strategic list of acquisitions, August Sonder was very high on that list. We had a wonderful collection from 53, but really given the breadth of what Sonder achieved, we knew that we didn't have enough. And so the cost of vintage prints is really quite high. And what was amazing was that by reconsidering these beautiful prints from the 1990s that were made from August Sonder's original negatives with his grandson's participation with a master printer named Jean-Luc Differdong, all of these to acquire a full set of these modern prints made it possible for us to represent this achievement in its entirety. So I just wanted to give a little background to that. And we actually have another comparison of an early print and a later print. Maybe we can bring that up too.
Oh, I just wanted to clarify. I see someone's asking if the 2015 acquisition is a digital print, and I just want to clarify that it is gelled and silver.
Yeah,
they're both gelled and silver prints.
Actually, both gelled and silver, both made from August Sonder's original negative. So they are, that's an interesting question in and of itself. Here's another example. This one's a little more subtle, and even in person, the difference between the vintage print and the 2019 print is more nuanced. And I should point out that if we didn't like the 1990s prints, we wouldn't have acquired them in 2015. We did a similar thing, for instance, with Diane Arbus. In 2004, we acquired prints that had been made not by Arbus, but by Neil Selkirk, a wonderful, very talented printer and photographer who had worked with her closely. So you have to always use your eyes, and that's one of the things the study center is great for, is to really in person grapple with the material characteristics of these prints so that you can really see, oh, the 2015 acquisition, those are really beautiful prints. They may not have been made by Sonder, but they're still very beautiful. I also think it's interesting the way the titles have changed. Oh, this is great. Yeah, let's keep going. Because this is an image of the back, the full mount and the back of the 1953 acquisition. This was how Sonder did that. So you see that he created a little. We'll get back to the titles because I know I sort of started that sentence, but he created a little paper overmap and then secured the paper to the back, secured the print to the back side of the mount and held it with another sheet of paper. So this is something fun that we could do if we were on 53rd Street. The titles changed because in 1953, we used the titles that were on the backs of the prints as our guide for what we should call our photographs. But in the 1990s, when the August Sonder Archive was deciding what should be considered the definitive title, they were referencing a whole range of material, Sonder's notes, early publications, other things like that. And so sometimes there are differences between, like, we
our title from 1953 has even been translated as An Indian Man and His German Wife, whereas these are called circus workers in the 1990s. And this is not unusual for a photographer, for different scholars to respond to different pieces of information as they determine what's the best title. It's certainly something that we
spend a lot of time thinking about reviewing titles, and it's challenging to know what the right decisions are.
Oh, and this is just a little image. This is from probably the second gathering of the August Sonder project. One of the things that's special about the project is that we bring the prints out so that people can look at them up close. So much like the study center, we really encourage people to look at the prints, to think about their scale, their materiality. And
as you can see, the image towards the center of this stack is a vintage print in between the portfolio prints. You can tell the difference in size.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And also, segueing to our next slide, but before we do it,
sorry,
I just one more second, Howie.
Just another question. Laura LaCava asks, who would have seen these Saunders' work in his lifetime?
That's a really excellent question. So he had a show at the Cologne in 1927. He published a book called Antlitz der Zeit, Face of Our Time, in 1929. But there actually were very few opportunities for public display of his work in his lifetime, which is one of the things that was so notable about the post-war sort of renaissance of the appreciation of what he had done. So after World War II, there were more and more opportunities, but it is an interesting question of Sonder was also working with clients. So in terms of sheer numbers, the most people who would have encountered his work during his lifetime were the clients that he worked with, for whom many of the pictures in People of the 20th Century were initially made for clients and were then reimagined as a part of that broader exercise. So it's an interesting question. But anyway, the one thing we wanted to say before we go to the next slide is at the far end there, looking at the print, is Judith Joy Ross. So carrying on, Tasha, why don't we go to the next slide and give
another question that came in that I think applies to all of our artists about, can you, Anton Lassier asks, can you talk about a print not made by the artist and how you can interpret the artist's intention?
Yes, and I think it's interesting. For different artists, it matters to different degrees. So let's just finish with August Sonder and then use that as a way of leading into Judith Ross. For August Sonder, he was somebody where after he died, there was the benefit of his son and later his grandson, who had worked closely with him during his lifetime, who really understood what was important to him to bring out in his prints, and they handled that very responsibly. Similarly, as I just mentioned with Diane Arbus, Neil Selkirk, who worked very closely with her in her lifetime, made very beautiful prints after her death that equally represent what she would have done. Now, that isn't always true. Someone like Judith Ross, who makes all of her own prints, and she is an extraordinary artist who uses a very antiquated process in her printing. So these are all gelatin silver printing out paper prints, which is, Tasha, do you even know if they make this paper anymore?
It was discontinued. No one manufactures it anymore. I think it was around until about 2005, maybe. So I think some people have stockpiled it, but I mean, it's certainly expired, the chemistry.
And these are also contact prints. So
I'm sorry. My friend Joni Sternbach says there is paper now.
Oh, thank you, Joni. The generic term for it is a printing out paper print, as opposed to a developing out paper print.
And the distinction being that in a printing out paper print, the image emerges without the aid of a chemical developer. The chemicals are used to preserve, to fix the print, but that the image emerges without a chemical. In a developing out print, the images can emerge, they're latent until you put it in a chemical bath. Would you say that's fair, Tasha?
Yes. So sorry, just to clarify, the name of the process that Sarah is describing is gelled and silver printing out paper prints. So there are brands that sell this paper that you can buy. So it is a commercial product, but it's also just a method of describing the way the print is made.
Thank you, Tasha. And also you should note, Tasha and our colleague Megan Feingold made this beautiful PowerPoint for us. And we include the captions below, not just to be, to give helpful information. So you'll notice that we put the title and the date, the type of print, and the dimensions so that you all can have a sense of how big or small these are and how the photographers made them. Just to also give you a sense, if we were in the study center, Howie, can we go to the next slide? This is how these pictures looked when they were first exhibited at the museum, which was in the new photography series. This was the first one, right, Tasha?
Yeah, and to be clear, those are the exact prints on the wall. It's not a different print of this. That is the object in our collection.
So if you were to come to the study center, we would be taking those out together. I think they're still matted actually in the same mat, aren't
they? Yeah. Cut together.
And let's go to the next one. So we also, though, wanted to give a sense of how Judith, so she uses this contact printing method, these printing out paper prints, and you'll see that she uses this not just for series like Portraits from the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, but for lots of series that she made. One of the ones that I also really like, just as a note of date, the portraits at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial were made in around 1984. The new photography series the first one was in 1985. So these were really featured immediately after Judith made them in the new photography series, which is, of course, why we called it the new photography series. But soon after that series, Judith tried to imagine, what does sympathy or antipathy look like in a photograph? How can the way you feel about a subject come through? And she made a really important series of images of congressmen and senators and other people working in the United States Congress. And you can see, well, I should say, it is an open question. I can see, perhaps you can, or you agree or don't. So this is a portrait she made of a Republican. And in the next slide, this is hers of Pat Schroeder, a beloved Democrat from the state of Colorado. I will say, as another part of the August Sonder project that we just mentioned, my former boss, Peter Galassi, presented August Sonder's portraits of politicians, and he juxtaposed them against Judith Ross's portraits of politicians to really get at this question of how sympathy or antipathy were captured. But I also, I knew that we wanted to have Judith, her voice, her achievement sort of brought into the August Sonder project. And in part, it was because of this wonderful story that's summarized on the screen. This is from Ahorn magazine, right?
Yes, this is from her interview in Ahorn magazine, which is an excellent interview and really captures, she speaks so well about her intentions in making the work and how she feels about it and how she goes about it. And
Ahorn is spelled, sorry, let's just spell it, Maybe Sarah Bodenson, we could look for that, maybe include a link to it. Anyway, it's a wonderful article. And at the end of it, the reason we have this up is that when she describes her experience of bringing her portfolio to MoMA to share with John Cherkovsky, and she was showing him this work, and he asked her, as you can read here, he asked me if I was familiar with the work of August Sander. I tried to deny the influence, but he saw that I was holding back and said, "It's okay, Judith. It's called tradition to be influenced by another's work." And so Judith is an artist that has been influenced by Sander, and that she talks about very powerfully in this interview in Ahorn Magazine and elsewhere. So anyway, this is the arc that we're tracing today, such as it is. Tasha, any other questions about this, or should we try?
I'm maybe through.
I feel as if I don't want to go too much over. We were shooting for a 45-minute session. We're not going to do it in 45 minutes because of all my technical challenges in the beginning. But we'll at least go into one, and I'd like to have a few minutes to talk about the fourth artist that we chose for today. Can we do that?
Sure. Yeah, let's go back to the slideshow.
So we also heard some wonderful feedback from all of you saying, rightfully, that our last choice of artists was very heavily American. And so both we want to bring in more and also a more international audience, or not audience, a more international scope. Because of course, what we do at MoMA is not only American. We acknowledge our sort of rootedness in New York City and in the American scene, but we're deeply interested in art being made all over the world. One of the things that I'm working on right now, and maybe that could be a subject of a future session, is thinking about Brazilian modernist photography. It's something I spend a lot of time thinking about. But Iñaki Bonillas, we have a wonderful interview recorded on Seeing Through Photographs, and we encourage you all to listen to it. It's one of the resources, and he has his really own idiosyncratic take on portraiture, but it seemed like, why not mix it up a little? So the first acquisition of Iñaki's work that we made at the museum was this 6-part work called A Card for J.R. Plaza. Now, at the time at which Iñaki made this, he had been mining the archives of J.R. Plaza for some time. And this was not just a random archive that Iñaki was mining, but it was the archive that belonged to his grandfather, who was deeply engaged with photography as an amateur. But one of the interesting things about Iñaki's diving into this archive was to exploit different traits or idiosyncrasies of the archive. And one of the things he discovered is that J.R. Plaza made false and true business cards for himself, involved in a number of different professions, many of which had nothing to do with what he actually did for a living. And this idea of using photography as a way of finding truth, but also investigating fiction, it was deeply interesting to me. It was Iñaki who put these cards and these pictures together. So Iñaki is mining the archive, he's putting these things together, and although, and it's funny, I think, which is a nice thing that you don't always get in photography. These are pigmented inkjet prints, so if you were looking at them in person,
one of the things you would notice is that Iñaki scanned the cards and the images onto sheets, single sheets. So these are not 4 different objects collaged onto a sheet. It's a scanned print of this investigation of his. And Iñaki is just really funny. He also was featured on the cover of the Aperture magazine that came out last fall of the Mexico City. And I'm going to just, bragging is gross, but I'm just going to say I introduced Iñaki to the editors of Aperture. So I feel at least remotely or tangentially responsible. And that's, it's one of the joys of getting to travel, when we'll all be able to travel again. Who knows when or where. Would you, Tasha, Howie, can we go to the next slide? Here's Iñaki smiling in his studio. When we first met him in 2014, I was in Mexico City with a group of MoMA colleagues, and it's a rare joy to get to know artists. The plant and the toilet is when you walk into Iñaki's studio. That's what greets you in his little courtyard. And I'll say that, there are different ways of getting to know the works of art in the collection. One of them is through getting to know the artists and reading interviews like the Judith Ross one on Ahorn magazine, or reading artist statements or artist book like August Saunders' People, Face of Our Time, Antlitz der Zeit. These are, or if you're lucky, getting to know artists themselves, talking to them about their work. These are all, but also getting to know their prints. So all of these are kind of modes of entry. And these are things that we at the museum really try to encourage. It's one of the things in Seeing Through Photographs why we do audio interviews and we do studio visits. And we do these things because artists teach us to see the world in different ways. And I'll never look at an archive the same way as I did before I met Iñaki, for sure. And I'm grateful for that.
Sarah, a question that actually came through earlier, but might be an interesting through line through our whole presentation, was about, I think it was for Sonder, and the difference between it existing as a document and as an art object.
That is thank you. That's a great
one. Sorry,
one.
I lost the name of the person who asked that question, but it's
it will, by the way, after all my technical challenges today, we're gonna say, oh, it's forgiven. Except for me, I'm gonna work on it better for next week. So I would say the difference, let's say, between a document and an art object. Is that what you think the question was?
Yes.
Something like it. I think maybe, and I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about this, Tasha. I would say maybe the difference is a false distinction. In other words, you almost might argue that anything that a museum collects and exhibits carries with it certain characteristics that that either evoke or that that merit artistic consideration. And that goes from the humblest of snapshots to the most ambitious of projects like Saunders' People of the 20th Century, and everything in between. So while I think some people, some artists working with a camera really think of themselves as artists, and that's their goal, like Judith, she is making works of art. She is aligning herself with an artistic tradition. The Iñaki is really, or let's say Iñaki's grandfather, they are using the medium in different ways. With his grandfather, it was really an amateur engagement that then, through Iñaki's intervention, comes into the museum as almost a conceptual project. And I think that the point is, I think, not to get too hung up over whether something should be categorized as a document or an experiment or a conceptual project or a work of art, but really to think, how well are the ideas and forms captured in that, and what do they say to us now and then? And you and I, Tasha, we're very lucky. We get to work with all of these things that, and it's part of why we wanted to do these study center sessions, is to share all of this with all of you in a sort of more granular, textured way, the way we get to do when people come to 53rd Street for a study. Did somebody really disagree with us? I only see once in a while, I see the comments pop up and somebody really disagrees. So I'm sorry.
That's okay. I mean, it's,
by the way,
people can have many interpretations, and that's like another amazing thing about our collection, is because it's the entire history of, the entire history of photography, is that we have so many interpretations, so many visions, so many entry points into each topic. And I mean, the point is to have a dialogue about all of these things.
The goal is not consensus. Right. The goal is not consensus. The goal is better technical Wi-Fi on my side. So I'll just say that before next week, we'll do what we can. I don't know what happened today. So thank you all for tuning in. I think we will send you a questionnaire. You are welcome to be as scathing as you want about the technical challenges, but we already know about that. So if you would also tell us what you think about the idea of concentrating on fewer numbers of artists or other topics that you'd like for us to address in a study center session. This really is for you. We care about your opinions, and we thank you for joining us so much. And Tasha, again, thank you to you and to Megan for all the help you give all the time in isolation and on 53rd Street, and to our wonderful education and AV teams who really, let me tell you, I would have just gone into the closet and cried earlier an hour ago, but thanks to them, we persisted, and we thank you all for your patience, and we'll be in touch soon with more wonderful seeing through photographs opportunities next week and in the weeks to come. So thanks all. Bye.
Bye.